All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Project Podcast presented by Project Insulin. I still trip up, even though I've done this like 20 times now. We're all human. Today I have Jerry with me. Jerry is one of our Project Insulin volunteers, which I will have him plug a little bit later. But for now, Jerry, tell everyone who you are, what you do, and where are you in the world?
Okay, great. My name's Jerry Hines. I live in Spokane, Washington. I'll be 62 in a couple months. Married. Between my wife and I, we've got 5 kids and 5 grandkids, ranging in age from a couple months to 15 years old. On the grandkid side, the kids are all well into their 30s and above. I grew up on the west side of Washington State and moved over to Spokane about 11 or 12 years ago now. Background in accounting and finance. I had a long career in public accounting and private industry, and then I've been working in the nonprofit sector, about 25 years now. I'm trying to ease into retirement and working part-time at a private school as the business manager, doing some light HR, payroll, facilities, cleaning bathrooms occasionally, things like that.
Very nice at small school. Yeah. Yeah. And Jerry is helping Project Insulin with setting up our QuickBooks, which has been a little harder than we would have expected. But Jerry, I appreciate all your help and excited to be talking today about your diabetes story. So why don't you tell us a little bit about when you were diagnosed, how you were diagnosed? Obviously, we've talked a few times about this. Pretend it's brand new, first time telling it.
Yeah, so I was about 8 years ago, so spring of 2017, my wife and I had been on a trip to visit kids and then went to New Orleans, Nashville for several days. And this was probably March of that year. In hindsight, I hadn't been feeling great that winter, but I just didn't really realize it at the time. Right at the end of the trip, my eyesight kind of started to get wonky, and I had a fairly new prescription that I was wearing. And so the first thing I did was call the optometrist when I got back and said, "Hey, I need to come in and see you." And he looked at things and said, "You don't strike me as a person with diabetes. Of course, you don't have a history of it, but I'd get some blood work done pretty soon and make an appointment with your doc because sudden changes in eyesight are an early sign of diabetes and complications." And I did that. I called the primary care doc's office, got an appointment later that week, and went and did labs the next day. They called me about 2 days later and said, "You need to get into either see your doctor or you need to get into the emergency room. You've got diabetes and your A1C is over 11. And it all came to a head that week. I got real ill that day, really probably, and had that kind of classic, lost a bunch of weight all of a sudden, was thirsty all the time, felt really sick, and then got in. I think I saw my primary care doc the next day, and he looked over the labs and gave me a shot of insulin during that visit to get my blood sugar down. And luckily, I think for me, I have late onset autoimmune diabetes, or LADA. And I think I got lucky that my primary care doc had a lot of experience with type 1 diabetes in his family and didn't go down a type 2 diagnostic path, which is pretty common for late onset people, and started me on insulin therapy right away.
Wow. It's amazing because every story we hear about diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2, like the signs that continuously show up is a doctor who knows about it, a family member who noticed something. For you, like your eye doctor. Obviously we know that there are complications in diabetes lead to poor eyesight. Just having diabetes for a long time can lead to worsening eyesight. But you're the first person to share that your optometrist was like the first person to sniff this out. And to your point, and I wish we had more people on the podcast who have type 1, who were originally diagnosed as type 2 or have type 2, and just to share what their stories are like, especially for later in life. That would be really great. Anyway, if that is your story, let us know. But it's very interesting to hear the way that these diagnosis stories happen. And so I guess tell me a little bit more about, you get diagnosed, you get your first shot of insulin. like what's going through your head, right? You're not feeling
Yeah,
well this whole time, and now you have a diagnosis, right? Did that help, or was that like confusing?
it was quite confusing at the beginning just because I don't, and I've got a kind of a complicated family history. I was adopted at birth, but I've known my birth family for a long time now. And so I started calling like those folks and saying any history of diabetes in the family. I do have some family history of autoimmune disease on my birth mother's side with Hashimoto's and thyroid issues, which is my understanding now pretty common with people with type 1 diabetes have other autoimmune issues that can go on. For
Mhm.
example, my thyroid gets tested once or twice a year now. But there was no family history with type 1 that anybody knew about. Um, you also realize going back a couple of generations, or I did at the time, that sometimes those people don't live a long life. My birth father
Yeah.
died very young. I never met him, for example. So sometimes this didn't show up in me until my mid 50s. Some of my relatives didn't even live that long. But I dug in, just, I think part of my nature is just research and gathering information. I had a book at home. Actually, I'd seen a presentation a couple years prior at a Rotary meeting by the former mayor of Anchorage, who's written a couple books about his diabetes journey. He's really an interesting guy and a really great presentation. I just happened to buy the book because the book had some recipes and things in it. But I went back through. I'd never really read the book, and I went and grabbed it off the shelf and went through it. And that was a good primer. Obviously, having the internet and access to information there, I started to dig in, and then I pretty quickly had a nurse practitioner appointment with an endocrinology practice here in town, and just meeting a diabetes educator and her. She set me up on insulin therapy. I got some information about how to handle sort of nutritional stuff. And a lot is interesting because once you get your blood sugar under control a little bit, once you're as high as I was with LADA, your body settles down. So I had the autoimmune testing that they do done, which confirmed the type 1 diagnosis, also confirmed that my pancreas wasn't making insulin very well, but was still making a little bit of insulin. So that helped them in terms of dosing. And I went on a dose of long acting insulin at that point in time, and then started changing my diet a bit and got my A1C down fairly quickly to in the mid 6 range just with those changes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. We've talked about A1C a couple times now. I didn't want to go back to it because you had said it earlier, but for reference, for someone without diabetes, like a high A1C or like right before pre-diabetes is 5.4. So what'd you say,
I was
11
like
point something?
11.3, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, is almost double, is more than double what someone without diabetes would have. Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you know what's going on with your body so you can
Yeah.
regulate properly. So your
Yeah.
A1C comes down. So that's no, that's really good though. And I guess talk a little bit about the changes. Like give me a little bit more about the diet changes. Like what did you do? Did it feel like a sacrifice or did it feel like okay, like now I just eat this way or and obviously food and all that stuff is different for every person, and you don't have to do the whole keto
Right.
diet if you don't want to. But yeah, I'm curious what your experience.
Yeah, I'd always had a bit of a sweet tooth. So breakfast for me was usually like a muffin and a cup of coffee. So I started to look at some of those easier to make changes and not cut carbs out
Mhm.
completely because I'm a fairly active person and had been a cyclist and doing things like that on a fairly regular basis. So going carb free doesn't really work when you need energy to exercise,
Yeah.
at least in my experience. But I did start to make some changes where I was lowering the amount of carbs that I was taking in, snacking less, those types of things, and working over that. It took me probably 6 weeks or so to dial in a dosage of long acting insulin that worked with some of the more minor changes I made in my diet. I wouldn't say I went crazy. I did cut
Yeah.
sweets out and just reduce the carbs that I was taking in at meals, not eliminating them. It's probably been a
Yeah.
it's been a big change for because my wife can eat anything she wants, and she'll never weigh more than 120 pounds. So her living with me and me living with her, that's been an adjustment where I don't want her to have to change her life. just
Hmm.
because of me, but there's been some meeting in the middle a little bit about what we eat and things like that.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense. It's funny because that is something that me and my partner, who has type one, I eat a whole lot more vegetables
Yeah.
now. It's just, yeah, we're not having pasta
Yeah.
for dinner every night.
Yeah. And that's something too that I've had to adjust to, where when I was younger too, and sometimes it's hard to separate out like what's the diabetes done to me versus what's just aging done to me. In my
Mhm.
younger days, if I wanted to lose 5 pounds, I could do it in a week by exercising more and just eating a little bit less. It was fairly easy. As a type one, especially when you're exercising and you really have to put in the fuel to be able to just get through a workout, and it like losing weight becomes tough. I can't do it the way I used to. And I've put on probably 15 pounds since I got diagnosed. And so it's just having to figure out maybe the next steps in this journey of how do I maybe get my weight back down to something I feel a little more comfortable with, even though it's not extreme. How do I plan workouts? The part of living with this, I think, is having to plan everything out when I wasn't used to doing that with my life. Even to just go work in the yard, I have to plan for it because I'm going to burn. I seem to be quite sensitive to exercise. So I can go from a blood sugar of say 200, get on a rowing machine for half an hour, and if I'm not real careful, I'll be hypo at the end of that workout. Just planning daily activities, even if they don't seem that physical, that's been a big change.
Yeah, that's a good segue because I think I talk about this every single time I'm on a podcast episode is people with diabetes make 180 more decisions every day than people without diabetes. And I always find that statistic so fascinating because it is so hard to think up 180 different decisions that you could have to do in a single day. But talking about the rowing machine is like a very easy example. It's okay, what is my blood sugar now? When was the last time I ate? If I go row now, it's going to lead to most likely I'm going to drop. So should I take some sugar now or should I like have something by the table so that partway through I can eat a snack that'll bring my blood sugar back up as I'm plummeting? All these, right? Like all these different pieces. And I'm curious, and sorry, before I let you speak of more, I think the American Diabetes Association did a really cool thing this year where they had people hold balloons and bounce it while they do their normal day-to-day stuff. And so that way to signify that you have to stay focused on this other thing while you're doing your day-to-day lifestyle. And I found that as the closest thing that I could think of to explaining what that 180 decisions looks like. All to say, Jerry, do you have some tangible examples, or maybe even go through the rowing as an example of? Can you like take us into what that looks
Yeah.
like in your head?
Yeah. Just for something like that. And so I'll even say working out at home is very different than going out because I like to go outside too, take the dogs on walks, go on bike rides, things like that. Takes even more planning because of all the stuff I have to take with me. So, like for a workout, let's say in the afternoon, I start planning around lunchtime. What time do I think I'm going to get home from work? What should I have for lunch? How much insulin should I take at that meal so that I can start to build my blood sugar level up a bit. I don't want it to be high for too long, but I need to be at well over 150 before I start exercising, even if it's only going to be for a half hour. So I do that. I either take less insulin at a meal or I'll take some quick acting carbs when I get home to go through a workout. And then I have stuff there with me too. Just like you were saying, I have some goo packs or something there so that I'm watching the phone because 8 years in, I've gone from Lantus, one dose of long acting insulin a day and finger sticks for my blood sugar. Now I'm on a pump and a CGM combined. And so I put the phone on the pump readings or the CGM readings, and I monitor that during my workout. If I get down below 150, I start to take in more carbs. So that's what that looks like. And then if I'm going outside on a bike ride or something, I'm loading a bunch of stuff in a backpack and planning for emergencies, but also just planning for carbs I need to take in while I'm exercising outside.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was about to say that was for your home workout. For the outside workout, as you alluded to, it's much more intensive. And yeah, it's just, I just think that 180 decisions, like one day I will be able to
Yeah.
properly illustrate it to people, because to me, that is one of the things that just, when we talk about insulin affordability and what Project Insulin is doing, is like just alleviating one of those decisions could like really
Yeah.
just help, right? Where the decisions aren't like, can I afford this insulin vial? Oh, it's going to cost me tomorrow's meal or whatever it might be. So, anyway, thank you for going through it and explaining it a little bit more. I don't know if you have any other tidbits or stories you want to share about your experience with diabetes, your experience with being a lot of late stage diabetes, getting diagnosed later in life, or anything else, because I was going to move on to a new subject, but I wanted to give you one chance to say anything
Yeah,
else.
it's. I think one of the things, and maybe we'll get to this. Maybe this is your question, but one of the things that adds to that, making 180 decisions a day, is you wake up, you look and see what your blood sugar is. That so much of this stuff has become routine in the last 8 years that it's hard to think about what my life was like before that. So I think that's part of it. But just navigating the medical community and the insurance industry has been a huge change and very eye opening for me. And I think a lot about what my life would be like if I didn't have a good job with good health insurance. It's expensive to have this, even with that. But if you don't have
Yeah.
access to those resources and just being able to navigate what's it like to transition from different treatment regimens as you go through this process. Every time I've changed jobs, I've had to change insurance. I've had to change providers because that practice doesn't take this insurance. Just that navigation process has taken a lot.
Yeah, and I think uh, I wasn't directly going to ask you this, but my next question was going to be adjacent, because it was going to be, why did you choose to reach out and volunteer for us? But before we get there, I think not only does the change in health insurance muck everything up, but it also, they can change what insulin you use. They could deem you not needing a pump. Like they could just tell you, now you're back to long acting insulin because that's what we want you to be on. And I think that is just horrible, because you like build a routine, right? Like you understand, like you're making these 180 decisions every day, but it's the same 180 decisions, right? Like it's off of the same baseline, right? It's like you have your Excel sheet and you're changing the numbers, but the insurance company is now like changing the formulations altogether. So you have to redo the whole sheet and get comfortable with it. And then who knows, like you'll need a new insurance because you'll get
Yeah.
another job. So no, I appreciate you bringing that up. Any one story that comes to mind that you're willing to share with us today about some of the struggles you've had with the healthcare system, even if it wasn't like, it's not rationing, right? Like you said, you have had good.
Yeah, I haven't had to do that, but yeah, there are a couple things come to mind. It's I the first nurse practitioner that I had who got me started on just my long acting insulin therapy at the beginning. Probably about a year in, I was starting to have a lot more spikes in my blood sugar around meals. And it got to the point where I wasn't really able to manage that with diet alone. I would test after a meal and I would be up closer to 200, and I could spend all day doing that because I didn't have any short acting insulin to react to it at the time. So I set up a visit with her, and she just looked at me and said, I don't even want to talk about putting you on multiple daily injection therapy, meaning I was going to take mealtime short acting insulin until you're taking 40 milligrams of Lantus a day. And I was probably at half and that was just her answer.
Wow.
And I didn't know what to do with that because I didn't know who to talk to. And so I set up a meeting at a different endocrinology practice, and I was like, I got to get a second opinion because this kind of doesn't make sense to me. And I got in to see another nurse practitioner at a different practice, and I walked her through where I was. We went through my whole history, and she just looked at me and she said, that is nuts. And so just that going from one nurse practitioner in one practice to another one who's telling you a completely different thing puts me on mealtime insulin at that visit. It just, that was shocking to know one person's opinion. Because I think as a person, you just take in what practitioners tell you as gospel. right?
Mhm.
And that made me much more aware that I need to be more in a position of advocating for myself and questioning things that I'm told by medical providers than I ever thought I would need to be. I guess the other thing is just navigating the insurance industry has been challenging between the practitioner putting dosing schedules together, the insurance companies changing what they will provide you. I've had insurance providers tell me I couldn't take certain insulins. I've had providers when I'm supposed to be getting a 90-day supply of stuff per my plan tell me we've changed our policy. We don't allow pharmacies to break up boxes of insulin pens anymore, so you're only going to get a 40 or 50-day supply. Just navigating that process and realizing again, you really have to be your own advocate and make sure that you're getting everything you're supposed to get. And I've found myself being in a position of having to train the person at the pharmacy counter. That's not how this works. The prescription says this. This is how many units of insulin I take per day. This is the math on how many pens I'm supposed to get. It's that kind of stuff. And that part's been eye-opening for me.
Yeah. And I think that is a very common story for people. Like 90 day supply, I think, is a really good example. Is you're used to your supply being X, and then suddenly, without warning, without notice, it's sorry, Jerry, you're now only getting 30 days at a time. And let's say you have a 30-day supply and you're leaving the state on day 28 or day 29, and you didn't know about this, right? And so now you have to go and get like an emergency override, and you only have another 20 days before that happens, and just like the stress around all of these different things. And if you're short, or if you take more insulin 1 month, that 90-day supply provides you with a little bit of a cushion, so that if you go over 1 month, like you have more insulin to use. So no, I appreciate you sharing these stories with us. I think this is a part of these conversations that I need to do a better job of initiating, like ensuring that people share some of the stories that they've been dealing with healthcare providers and healthcare professionals, because everyone has them. It's just a matter of sharing it with people and making it perhaps a little bit less about origin stories and more about what's going on today. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that, and maybe you've just inspired a new segment. Before we wrap up, I did want to ask about your involvement with Project Insulin, because you are, I think, maybe the first or second person who's properly volunteering with us who joined Project Insulin after you saw us on NPR, I believe, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
So you saw us on NPR. In the past, it was some other source or social media or whatever it might be. But I'm curious, like, what inspired you to get involved, and what have you learned? And I know this is risky on my end because we did not prepare this. So what you're saying is the honest truth. There was no prep done here. What have you learned about the work we're doing, and how it's like moving forward since you've been on the team? Share a little bit of what it looks like from your end.
Yeah, so I did hear the interview on NPR. It really got me thinking about, because I've been on this journey for 8 years. I know how difficult it's been for me, but then I put myself in the position of looking at it from the lens of somebody who doesn't have this stable employment and health insurance history that I've been lucky to have over the last several years. And just thinking about navigating this within the framework that I live in, which is good job, good insurance, and how much of a pain in the rear it's been, thinking about it through the lens of somebody who doesn't have that to fall back on, and having to make decisions about rationing insulin, whether or not they can buy it this month, not having access to a CGM because they don't have health insurance and they're so expensive. Things like that just made me think about what could I do that might help a little bit. And then I look at my background working with nonprofits and having an accounting background as well. And that I just reached out and said, if there's anything I can do to help, I'm here. And that's how I got involved.
Yeah, and it came at a time that we really needed / still need help with our end of year accounting / taxes. Again, I do truly appreciate the efforts you've gone to help us get this all figured out and squared away. But yeah, I guess last question for you is the second half of that previous one, but I have to stop asking two questions at a time. What have you learned about working with Project Insulin so far? Is there anything that through our conversations, right? Like it's easier when you have a relationship with me that you learn things that I can't just put on social media because A, I'm focused on doing other parts of the business, and B, it's just hard
Yeah.
sometimes. Anything that you've learned so far while working with us that you were surprised by or that was really interesting to you?
Let's, I, I think the just learning more about how you came up with this idea, like how do you arrive at something that's a helpful solution for this really complex problem? And hearing you walk through the genesis of what Project Insulin is and how you move through the process of, at the end of the day, getting a drug approved that you can actually start to get out into the marketplace that helps people. And it's all of the complex steps involved in doing that. And then thinking about the enormous amount of money that's going to take. That in and of itself is mind blowing. But also hearing those steps, knowing that you need to go through them, you've thought through the process. How am I going to get from point A to point B? And I think part of what got me involved is I think it's doable and I think it's something that's really needed. So I know it's not going to happen overnight, but it seems like you're taking the right steps to build a network of people who are wanting to get involved financially and support this, who are wanting to get involved with the mission as well. So it's made me really excited about being able to be a small part of it and see it take flight.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jerry. And I think like something we want to do more of is be more transparent with our community, with our followers about what's going on. Because there's a lot of just like time where I'm doing stuff, but it's not like newsworthy. It's just Project Insulin sends out 100 emails today, right? It's not like a particularly interesting thing to be sharing. We do have some exciting news coming in the next couple of months. So that will be fun to share and finally break a little bit of the silence on what's been going on in the background. Uh, but yeah, I appreciate you saying all those kind of things, Jerry, and just being honest about it. I think that is it for my end. If you are interested in volunteering for Project Insulin, projectinsulin.org. If you'd like to be on the podcast, also go to projectinsulin.org, send me an email. If you have any questions, any thoughts, any things you'd like me to talk more about, whether it's on the podcast or just in Project Insulin, in the Project Insulin universe, let me know. Happy to peel the curtain back as people ask for things because I don't know what you guys are curious and learning about until you guys tell me. Jerry, any last words?
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you again, everybody. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe on Spotify and YouTube and share it with your friends. So thank you again, Jerry, and
All right,
we'll see you next time.